So tell us what you're doing with Democrats.com.
Well, as you know, we've dumped some 560 billion tax dollars into the occupation of Iraq, and a lot of it since we elected a Congress in November '06 to stop that. And there is a proposal from the president for another $102 billion, which will be coming up in April. And there's this myth floating around that Congress is helpless and can't do anything about that and needs to just keep on funding the occupation and worry about it 10 months from now. And we're saying no. And a long list of organizations that work on peace and justice are joining with us and saying no. And we're organizing town hall meetings asking Congress members to end the funding, to not give the president this next $102 billion. And so we're going to organize these Iraq town halls in hopefully all 435 congressional districts during the month of April. And you can go to Democrats.com and find an easy kit to connect with people in your congressional district, see who's already organizing a meeting, or start one yourself.
Okay, so let's go back a little bit. $102 billion. What is that going to be for?
That is going to enrich a handful of war profiteers and disaster capitalists, including the Halliburton Corporation. It is not going to do anyone any good, but it's the next installment on the funding of the occupation of Iraq, which has not been a cheap thing. Contrary to the preliminary advertising, it's costing more than $50 million and taking more than a couple of weeks.
Right.
And, you know, we elected a Congress overwhelmingly with a clear mandate in November of '06 to end this thing. And it takes a simple majority in the House or the leadership of the so-called leadership, or it takes a filibuster of 41 in the Senate or the leadership of the so-called leadership to simply say no. And they've gotten this right on telecom immunity. They've said, no, we're just not going to bring that up. We're not obliged to do it. We're not going to do it. And we're asking them.
Well, we're not out of the woods on that yet.
No.
But
they
the
could
House,
still cave.
the House has been semi-heroic on that, and the Senate obviously they totally caved in. But this sounds, David, like deja vu all over again. I mean, we've been going up to that mountaintop again and again and again, praying and hoping and cajoling and ultimately weeping about the Congress's inability to not cave in to George Bush's request for more money. What do you think is going to be different this time?
Well, there's also this myth that they're literally incapable of blocking the funding. That all they can do is pass bills, and they must be able to override vetoes, and they don't have those numbers. So we just need to hold our breath and elect more Democrats next year, and they'll be able to do it then, which is nonsense. And awareness that that's nonsense is spreading. The public is increasingly aware, I think, that the Democrats can simply not bring it up, as they're doing heroically, as you say, on the telecom bill. They cannot bring up a bill to fund the occupation of Iraq. And some of us have been screaming this since November of '06. We don't want you to pass bills and get them vetoed and complain about it. We want you to refuse to pass bills, and number one on that list is the funding bills for the occupation of Iraq. And not only is the public more aware of this, but organizations that have refused to take this approach are beginning to take it. There's this peace movement out there demanding this clear action, and always has been, with no funding. But there's also a very well-funded so-called peace movement, the Win Without War Coalition, MoveOn.org, etc. And they've tended, and they're still doing this, to dump tens of millions of dollars into the corporate media for advertisements to make sure those last 8 Americans learn that John McCain likes wars, etc. Well, they're finally starting to take an approach. They've put up a website called StandUpCongress.org, where they're actually demanding that the Democrats stop funding the occupation. Now, they're not putting a dime into it, and Tom Andrews, who runs this coalition, Win Without War, is working with us on these town hall meetings and is urging these groups to be part of this effort and to make this a serious, well-funded mission. And I hope that happens and it grows, because the public is increasingly demanding it, and the Democrats are going to soon find out that inaction is a liability.
But here's the counter to your argument, and the reason I know this is because we've heard this so many times. The Democrats feel that it will be devastating to our electoral chances in November for the Bush-Cheney administration and Mitch McConnell and all of those blowhards and criminals on the Republican side of the aisle who have done nothing to keep us from destroying our economy, et cetera, and have supported everything that Bush and Cheney have wanted. They're going to jump up and down every single day on the television. The Democrats do not support the troops. They don't support the troops. We're going to have to cut back on body armor. We're going to have to cut back on whatever it is that the troops need, on supplies. They're not getting, the health care that they need over there because we can't afford it, because the Democrats have said no, and they're not funding this. Forget the war. They're not funding the troops. That, in my opinion, as a political communication strategist, is a semi-legitimate concern.
Well, it's a legitimate concern that those voices would be screaming night and day on television. They're not legitimate voices. I mean, you bring
But the American people don't get that yet.
No, oh, yes, they do. You bring troops home, you don't need to put body armor on them. They're home, right? I mean, you don't have to keep them safe from missile attacks when you bring them home alive.
David, you're being too logical now. But we're not at that place. We can't bring them home until the next president, if then, depending on who the next president is.
Right, but if the Congress wants to pass a bill saying we will fund the safe and careful withdrawal of our troops, and here's $5 or $10 billion for that, which is, is ludicrous. It's pocket change to the Pentagon. The Pentagon doesn't need special funding to withdraw the troops. It just needs to bring them home. Well, fine, they could do that. They can do that to give themselves that political cover against that nonsensical accusation. I'm not as convinced as you are that they need to. I think you're underestimating the American public. I think you've got the corporate media nailed right, but I think that the public can sometimes see through the media, and that good media organizations like yours can help in that. But I can't, the other answer to your concern, which I think is a legitimate one as well, is hundreds of thousands of lives are going to be thrown away over the next 10 months. Iraqi people slaughtered, American servicemen and women, and the hundreds of thousands of lives we could have saved by putting that money to good use. And to me, that's much more important than which political party wins what 10 months from now.